The wrong sound was the silence. An elephant not moving, his body set into the pale crust of a vanishing waterhole. A ribbed flank lifted once, shallow and slow, then settled. Dust around him told the night's story. Half-moons of struggle, jackal prints veering away, the thin drag of a trunk that had run out of answers. Two rangers stopped where the mud began to shine. They watched the loosened skin over the shoulder, the bleached lashes, the ear that barely flicked at a fly. Drought had given this valley a quiet made of heat. The pan held a brown mirror shrunk to a saucer. The elephant lay on its edge as if trying to drink from memory. Musa, the older ranger, studied the ground. A herd had passed before dawn, small prints in orderly clumps, a calf's circling pauses where curiosity resisted urgency. Musa breathed once, as if a breath could be lent, and stepped forward with the care that announces respect. The elephant's eyes were half open. In them the sky looked stretched and brittle. A tremor ran along the belly. The trunk lay folded against the cracked lip of the pan, the tip dark with old mud. Musa crouched 2 body lengths away and waited, his shadow short, his hands quiet on his knees. He spoke only when the other ranger had circled wide to watch the thornveld. "Easy, old boy," Musa said. The elephant did not lift his head. A clear thread dropped from the mouth to the dust, gathering ants that moved like punctuation around breath. Musa wetted his scarf from a canteen and held it a moment, letting a single drip fall to show intent. When he inched closer, the trunk twitched once. It wasn't a warning, only the reflex of something that remembered water. Musa paused, lowered the cloth, and touched the ear's edge with the back of his fingers. The eye shifted, a slow, glassy movement that found him and drifted away. "You're not alone," he murmured. The second ranger stood 5 paces back, presence a wall against chance. They worked in small acts. Musa soaked the cloth again and let it beat across the base of the trunk so damp would travel toward the tip. He backed away each time, letting stillness settle after every kindness. The elephant's breathing thinned and returned, like a tide too tired to come ashore. The sun climbed, canceling color until everything looked like bone and ash. The land spoke drought in small textures, cracked mud like roof tiles, wiry grass whispering, thorns brittle to the touch. When it passed, flies returned to gather on hinges of skin, on the salt map of the flank. Musa signaled for a water bladder, and the other ranger jogged the long arc to fetch it, careful not to wake the alarm that emptiness can become. When the bladder arrived, they set it down like a gift and waited again. The trunk lifted a hand's breadth, faltered, and sank. Musa moved the bladder nearer, kept his body low, and opened the valve until a bead formed at the spout, a held tear that did not fall. Time narrowed to countable moments, a dampened cloth, a pause, a breath that did not stop. The eye closed once and opened again, slower, not defeated, but measuring. The wind shifted. Vultures swayed on thermals and then floated on. Nothing ended, but the thin edge of possibility grew, quiet, present, like shade entering a room. By noon, the pan's last shine was gone. What filled the space was mineral and heat, and the stubborn work of a body making do. The rangers traded the care without speaking, each knowing the other's movements as part of the same sentence. They cleared debris from under the tusk so the weight of the head would not bruise what might be needed later. They poured a trickle of water into a shallow, cool hollow and drew the trunk's tip toward it, then waited with their hands still in air. The tip quivered, explored, and found the wet. It was not a drink. It was the memory of one. But the trunk stayed a moment longer the next time, and then a moment after that. The ear lifted once, a small, salt-stiff flag against the sun. He watched the cadence of the ribs and the pulse at the temple, answering effort with stillness. Evening began before the light admitted it. The air softened by a degree. Far off, a herd gave a low call and fell silent. Musa lifted his head and listened, not for rescue, but for belonging. The elephant exhaled, thin, and gathered something of himself from the dust. His trunk rested near the valve and did not pull away. Between breaths, the valley's silence changed, as if making room. The first movement came as a whisper of muscle, almost lost in the heat haze. A tremor flickered through the elephant's ear, fragile and uneven, followed by a breath so faint it stirred only a thread of dust beneath the jaw. Musa's eyes caught it, the small insistence that life was not finished yet. He leaned in slowly, lowering his body so that the great head filled his vision. The stillness had been absolute for hours. Now, even the smallest shift felt like a tide returning. The trunk lay crooked against the cracked earth, the skin dry as bark. Musa dripped water along its length, patient, never rushing. Each drop landed with the quiet weight of hope. He did not try to move the trunk, nor urge it toward the bladder. He only offered, knowing that exhaustion had made even instinct feel heavy. His breath matched the elephant's shallow rhythm, waiting between beats for a sign that the animal was listening to the world again. A low rumble carried from the distance. The herd stood at the thorn's edge, silent shapes waiting. Calves pressed their flanks to mothers, their ears brushing against ribs that trembled with unease. They shifted, but did not leave, the bond pulling them back even as instinct told them to keep safe from human presence. One matriarch swayed a step forward, her trunk lifted high, scenting both fear and water, before pausing again. Between herd and man stretched the open plain, filled with silence and the ache of waiting. Musa lowered his head, speaking softly, a murmur of sound that seemed to belong as much to the land as to him. "Steady now," he whispered, voice barely above the cicadas. The words were not meant for meaning, only for tone, a rhythm as gentle as water flowing over stone. The elephant's eye shifted beneath its lid, the lashes quivering. The body did not rise, but the pulse beneath the temple grew steadier, answering the presence beside it. The other ranger moved closer with another pouch of water. Together they worked in silence, trading looks that carried both urgency and restraint. They knew that force could undo the fragile thread of trust being woven here. Every action was measured, the pouring of a small trickle, the waiting for breath to return, the pausing when the trunk twitched in confusion. When at last the tip of the trunk lifted by the width of a hand, Musa stilled completely. The air between man and animal held its breath. The trunk reached, faltered, and touched the damp ground near the pooled drops. A shiver passed along its length, the first acceptance. Musa's chest loosened, though he gave no outward sign beyond the stillness of his hands. He allowed the elephant to explore on its own, to decide if this gift of water was safe. The trunk traced the hollow again, then pressed into the cool mud with a sighing sound. For a moment, it stayed there, soaking, remembering. That was enough. The herd's unease thickened, voices low and hesitant. One calf cried out sharply, a high-pitched bleat that echoed across the flat land before being hushed by a mother's trunk. The sound stirred the fallen elephant, the ear flicking with faint response. It was a call he knew, even at the edge of weakness. Musa glanced toward the line of waiting giants, their shapes wavering in heat, then back at the bull before him. He spoke once more, softer than before. "You're not forgotten." The hours drew long, stretching the patience of both men and herd. The sun pressed down, heavy and unrelenting, painting sweat onto every surface. Flies rose and fell, but Musa brushed them away gently, keeping the elephant's face clear. The trunk moved again, a fraction stronger, edging toward the spout of the bladder this time. Musa tilted it carefully, a single thread of water sliding down. The trunk tip followed, touched the spout, and held. A long exhale shuddered through the body, carrying with it a sound close to relief. He drank only a little, just enough to wet the mouth and remind the body of what it once knew. The effort left him trembling, but his eye opened fully for the first time, dark and watching. In it was no plea, only presence, a quiet recognition of what stood beside him. Musa lowered his gaze, offering stillness in return. Around them, the earth held its silence, as if marking the moment when the distance between man and elephant narrowed to breath against dry earth. As the light began to tilt westward, the herd moved, again circling a little closer. Their bodies formed a restless wall, torn between caution and loyalty. Dust rose around their feet, catching the orange edges of the sun. The fallen elephant exhaled once more, the sound louder now, a groan of effort that rippled through the dry air. Musa reached for the cloth again, soaking it, and pressed it gently along the lip of the mouth. This time, the trunk did not fall away. It lingered, holding the scent of water, as if deciding to stay with the living. The afternoon wore on with a slowness that felt endless, the hours stretching beneath the furnace of the sky. The elephant remained on his side, ribs lifting unevenly, the trunk shifting only when nudged by instinct. Yet Musa did not move far. He stayed within reach, patient and deliberate, his actions becoming a rhythm. Every few minutes he wetted the cloth again, letting the coolness trail across the cracked skin of the trunk. Each act was small, almost imperceptible, but each one carried weight. The land was still, listening, as if holding its own breath to see if the balance might turn. The sun pressed downward, and the heat shimmered like a veil above the dust. Musa slid the water bladder closer and crouched low, angling his body so that part of his shadow stretched across the elephant's exposed flank. It was not much, but it broke the glare, softening the burn that seared the skin. Sweat ran freely down his face and his shirt clung dark with salt, but he gave no thought to comfort. His focus remained fixed on the slow exchange. Water for trust. Silence for patience. The other ranger moved around the perimeter, keeping watch, but the work of presence belonged to Musa alone. At first, the elephant gave little response. The eye would close, lashes trembling faintly, then open again to a thin sliver of the world. When Musa trickled water near the mouth, the trunk sometimes quivered, as though caught between memory and fatigue, but it did not reach. Still, he persisted, never pushing too far. He poured just enough to mark the earth, just enough for scent to rise. In time, the trunk lingered a little longer over the dampened patch before falling still again. The herd remained at a distance, restless in their waiting. They shifted in and out of the thornveld, calves fidgeting against their mothers' bodies. Now and then, a low rumble carried across the plain, soft and uncertain, the sound of animals that sensed danger but could not turn away. Their unease grew as the sun sank, but still they did not leave. The bond tethered them to the one on the ground. As the hours passed, Musa found himself working by instinct, adjusting his movements to the elephant's faint signals. When the eye widened fractionally, he stilled. When the breath came harder, he withdrew his hand. When the trunk twitched toward the water, he leaned forward only enough to guide it closer. The exchange was unspoken, built on repetition, on a language of stillness and offering. Slowly, something began to shift. The elephant's breathing deepened. Not strong, not certain, but steadier. His ear lifted higher now when the flies gathered, brushing them away with more force than before. The trunk stirred again, heavier but more directed, pulling toward the bladder. Musa tilted the spout, and this time the tip pressed against it without hesitation. Water ran along the ridges, dripping into the open mouth. The swallow that followed was weak but deliberate. Musa let out a breath, a sound almost like relief, though his body remained still, careful not to break the fragile trust being formed. The sun eased lower, its fierce weight beginning to soften. Shadows grew longer, spilling across the ground in cool ribbons. Musa shifted again, his frame bent so his shadow could fall over the elephant's eye. The creature blinked, slow and measured, then held its gaze on him. The moment stretched, silent and heavy with recognition. The eye did not dart away this time. It lingered, the darkness within reflecting both weariness and a fragile tether to life. Musa spoke then, his voice no louder than before, barely more than breath against the dry air. "You're safe," he said. The words were simple, their meaning carried not by language but by tone. The elephant blinked once more and his trunk lifted again toward the water. The rhythm was established. Drip, pause, swallow, rest. It was the rhythm of survival, repeated until the body remembered its own strength. As evening deepened, the herd moved closer, their silhouettes now clear against the dimming horizon. A matriarch gave a rumble, lower and longer than the rest, her body swaying with indecision. Musa kept still, knowing the herd would decide its own distance. The fallen elephant shifted slightly, muscles tensing beneath the hide, a tremor of effort that sent dust rising. For the first time all day, one massive leg twitched against the ground. It was not yet enough to rise, but it was movement that carried intent. Musa remained where he was, the shadow of his body falling across the elephant's side, his hands calm, his eyes steady. The animal blinked again, meeting his gaze not as threat, but as acknowledgement. In that weary recognition lay the faint spark of trust, born not from force but from the slow, patient offering of care. The valley darkened, filled with the chorus of evening insects. A wind stirred, lifting dust in soft spirals. Musa stayed by the elephant's side, his body a shield, his presence an anchor, waiting with the same patience that had carried them through the long hours. And in that waiting, a bond had formed, fragile, unspoken, but real. The night had been long, and the earth still held the memory of heat when the first pale light of dawn stretched across the plain. Musa remained at the elephant's side, his body weary, his eyes fixed on the rise and fall of the ribs that now carried more rhythm than before. The air was cooler, gentler, and for the first time since the struggle had begun, the land felt less like an enemy. The elephant's ear flicked with greater strength, brushing away the insects that had gathered through the night. Dust clung to his skin, yet there was a quiet promise in each breath that stirred against the morning air. The herd had drawn nearer during the dark hours. Their shapes lingered among the scattered acacias, a restless circle that never broke entirely away. Calves leaned into the steady sides of their mothers, their small trunks weaving in anxious motion. A matriarch shifted her weight, her massive silhouette outlined against the sky, torn between caution and the pull of kinship. Each low rumble that escaped her chest was met with uneasy silence, as though the whole herd was waiting for a signal that had not yet come. Musa rose slowly, stretching stiff muscles, and poured another thin stream of water. The elephant's trunk responded, less hesitant now, nudging closer until it found the spout. Drops ran into the waiting mouth, and a swallow followed, shallow but deliberate. Then came another. Musa tilted the container with care, his hand steady even as his heart quickened. This was no longer the fragile touch of survival alone. It was the beginning of return. The elephant shifted his weight with a long, shuddering breath. Dust billowed beneath his flank as one foreleg dragged forward, bending at the joint. He tried again, muscles tightening, a tremor running the length of his body. Musa stepped back slightly, not interfering, giving space for the struggle that could not be shared. The other ranger stood silent at the edge of the clearing, his face lined with the same careful hope. The bull pressed against the earth with his trunk, pushing as though trying to lift the sky itself. His hind leg quivered, then folded beneath him. A groan escaped, low and strained, carrying across the plain like thunder buried deep in soil. He collapsed again, his body slamming the ground, dust bursting upward in a choking cloud. Musa held his position, resisting every urge to move closer. To rush would be to break the fragile courage gathering in the animal's chest. Minutes passed before the effort returned. This time, the foreleg planted with firmer intent, hooves grinding against the hard crust. The bull heaved again, sides rippling with strain, trunk anchoring against the ground. Muscles bunched, shoulders quaked, and then, against all expectation, he rose. First to his knees, then swaying upward onto unsteady legs. The motion was uneven, trembling, but it held. His great frame towered once more, shadow stretching long across the awakening earth. The herd stirred at once. Rumbles spread through their bodies like echoes in a canyon. Calves squealed, mothers answered, the matriarch's trunk lifted high. Dust drifted from their hides as they shifted forward, hesitant at first, then with greater resolve. The circle closed, slow and deliberate, the weight of instinct, softened by the sight of one of their own standing again. Then came the moment no one had expected. The bull, still wavering, head low from exhaustion, released a sound from deep within his chest. It was not a cry of pain nor warning. It was a rumble, soft but resonant, carrying a depth that vibrated through the soil. It reached the herd like a forgotten chord, and they answered in unison, their voices layering into a chorus that wrapped around man and elephant alike. Musa lowered his head, overcome not by fear but by reverence. The sound was unlike anything he had heard in years of walking this land. It was recognition, unity, and survival braided into one. The elephants formed a living circle, their trunks brushing the air, their bodies swaying in slow rhythm as if gathering the weak one back into their fold. Musa stood at the center of it, motionless, part witness, part guardian, as the herd reclaimed their fallen kin. The bull swayed once more, knees bending as though he might sink again, but a matriarch pressed close, her tusks glinting as she steadied him with her massive flank. A calf brushed his trunk against the bull's leg, tentative but insistent, before darting back. The circle tightened, the chorus deepening. Dust lifted, drifting in pale shafts of morning light. Musa stepped back quietly, the gesture respectful, releasing the space to those who belonged to it. He watched as the herd pressed in, their collective presence becoming the support the man could no longer provide. The unbelievable moment stretched into silence again, broken only by the low hum of elephants breathing as one. The bull's eye closed, then opened slowly, his body leaning against his kindred, the bond unbroken by drought or despair. The plain lay still, washed in early light. A breeze swept over the brittle grass, carrying the scent of dust and water not yet fallen. Musa stood a few paces back, his hands loose at his sides, his chest steady. Around him, the circle of giants held their song, deep and unyielding, a sound that would not soon fade. The herd's circle loosened as the morning stretched into day. The bull stood among them, leaning still on the support of his kind, but each breath grew stronger. His legs trembled less with every shift of weight. Dust clung to his flanks, streaked with the dark traces of water that had fallen across him in careful offerings through the night. Now the herd moved with him, slow and protective, as if guiding him back into rhythm with the living earth. Musa and his companion stayed just behind, neither pressing forward nor breaking away. Their work was no longer to lift, but simply to witness, to guard the space where survival had begun to root itself again. The bull lowered his head, trunk brushing the ground, stirring the scent of dry soil and faint moisture still hidden below. His ears flapped once, wide and deliberate, casting away flies in a show of strength that had been absent only hours earlier. The sound carried across the plain like a promise. The body remembers how to endure. Above them, the sky shifted. A line of gray clouds thickened on the horizon, stretching slowly across the pale dome of heat. The air cooled by a fraction, and the breeze gained weight, carrying with it the smell of something rare in this season, rain not imagined but real, waiting to break. The herd lifted their trunks in unison, scenting the change. Calves squealed softly, circling their mother's legs, energy returning in quick bursts. The matriarch gave a long, low rumble that settled them, but even she could not mask the restless anticipation in her sway. The bull took a step. It was heavy and uncertain, his foreleg pressing deep into the cracked earth before lifting again. But it was a step forward, not merely a shift in place. The herd answered with movement, surrounding him as he walked, their bodies forming a shifting wall of protection. Musa watched, his chest tight, as the great animal pressed onward, slow, swaying, but no longer falling. Another step followed, and then another, each one steadier than the last, the herd's chorus echoing with encouragement only they could give. Musa spoke once, his words a whisper meant only for the air. Almost there. His voice carried no expectation, only a softness shaped by relief. He let the distance widen between man and elephant, knowing that what had begun in the dust was now returning to where it belonged. The sky darkened as clouds gathered overhead, shadows spilling across the plain. A silence hung, broken only by the deep breaths of the herd and the shuffle of hooves over brittle soil. Then the first drop fell, small, darkening the dust where it landed. Another followed, and then a scatter, until the air was filled with the scent of wet earth long denied. The elephants lifted their trunks again, rumbling as the rain began in earnest, washing dust from hides and softening the ground beneath their weight. The bull tilted his head, rain streaking across his face, running along the ridges of tusk and trunk. He did not falter. Instead, he pressed forward with renewed rhythm, joining the herd in motion as they moved together toward the greener edge of the land. Calves trumpeted softly, their voices thin but bright against the deeper notes of their mothers. The matriarch strode close to the bull, her flank brushing his as though to anchor him to the circle once more. Musa stepped back farther, his boots sinking into softening soil. He raised his face to the rain, closing his eyes for a brief moment before watching again. The work of hours, the risk and patience, now ended not with his hands, but with the sky itself giving what was needed most. He saw the bull move among his kind again, not separate, not fallen, but part of the living herd, his shadow lost among theirs. The land shifted with the rain, the brittle grass bending, the scent of renewal spreading wide. Dust ran in rivulets, cutting small rivers, into the pan that had once been dry. The elephants moved through it in steady lines, their bodies darkening under the wash, their rumbles carrying low and resonant across the greening plain. Musa lowered the water bladder he still carried, letting it rest against the ground. It was no longer needed. The sky had taken the burden. He stood in silence, the weight of the moment pressed into memory, not loud or triumphant, but quiet and enduring. He knew the herd would vanish into the distance as they always did, leaving only the tracks that rain would soon erase. The last thing he saw was the bull, walking with steadier steps, his trunk swinging in tired rhythm beside the matriarch. Together they disappeared into the veil of falling water, the land swallowing them back into its vastness. Musa remained still, the rain cold against his skin, the plain alive again with sound. And then there was only the hush of rain on dust, the grass bowing under droplets, and the memory of a life that had chosen to stand once more.